Welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today we're looking at, how to keep the creative juices flowing, especially in this new world of remote work that we're all in. And we've got a fantastic article here called How Not to Lose Innovation, Fostering Idea Generation in Remote Teams. And I think this is something that we're all grappling with, right? Like we know that remote work is kind of here to stay. But how do we make sure that we are not sacrificing, some innovation just to get things done?
Yeah. And what's so fascinating about this article is that it really digs into the science of brainstorming and reminds us that it's not just a meeting. It's like there's an actual neurological power at play here.
Yeah, I was really struck by that too. They talk about how our brains actually like light up and sync up when we brainstorm together, even if some of us, don't think of ourselves as like the creative type.
It really is. It's like we're tapping into a collective energy source.
Okay.
The article mentions mirror neurons, which fire when we observe other people's actions, emotions. So in a brainstorming session, as we're bouncing ideas off each other, our brains are literally mirroring each other's thought processes.
Mhm.
And that can lead to some, unexpected connections and breakthroughs.
So there's actually real science behind why brainstorming can be so effective. But, then the article makes this interesting point about serendipity and how those spontaneous water cooler conversations often can spark innovation. I don't know about you, but some of my best ideas have come up in like the most random places.
Absolutely. It's those unexpected encounters and casual conversations
Yeah.
that can really lead to those aha moments. But of course, one of the biggest challenges with remote work is replicating that, that sense of spontaneity and those informal interactions that you get in an office.
Right. You can't exactly schedule serendipity. So how do we bridge that gap? The article points to some pretty practical strategies that companies like HP are using, like
Yeah.
things like structured brainstorming sessions.
Exactly. And the key here is that structure, because when everyone knows the goal of the brainstorming session
Hmm.
and has a chance to contribute, it can actually create a sense of focus that sometimes gets lost in those free-flowing water cooler chats.
And it's like we're creating a virtual water cooler in a way. But it's not just about the structure, is it? The article also emphasizes the importance of building in social time into meetings. Those casual chats at the beginning or the end, that might seem, insignificant.
That
But
can be incredibly valuable.
Sure.
Even just a few minutes of informal conversation can help build rapport and foster that sense of connection that is so crucial for creativity. It's really about creating a space where people feel comfortable sharing their ideas, even those ideas that might seem, a little out there.
Yeah. And that brings us to another crucial point that the article makes, the role of company culture and leadership in fostering innovation. They talk about the importance of creating a safe space where people feel comfortable sharing, those nutty ideas, the ones that might seem crazy at first, but could actually lead to something groundbreaking.
Absolutely. And to be clear, when we talk about nutty ideas, we're not talking about reckless or impractical suggestions. It's more about encouraging a mindset that is open to exploring unconventional approaches, taking calculated risks and not being afraid to challenge the status quo.
I think a lot of us have been in situations where we've kind of held back from sharing an idea because we were worried about what people would think, especially if it was still, half-baked or...
Little unconventional. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's where leadership plays a really critical role. Leaders need to create an environment where people feel safe to express those ideas without fear of judgment. It's about fostering a culture of psychological safety, where people feel comfortable being vulnerable and sharing their ideas, even if they're not fully formed.
So it's not just about having a brainstorming session. It's about creating a culture that embraces those creative sparks, even the ones that might seem a little offbeat at first.
And that cultural shift needs to happen at all levels of the organization. It's not enough for just the CEO to say, we value innovation. It needs to be embedded in the company's values, the way that teams interact, and in the way that ideas are evaluated and implemented.
Right. And I imagine that this is even more challenging in a remote setting where you don't have those everyday in-person interactions. To reinforce that culture, the article even points to the potential for divides between remote and in-office teams, which is something that I wanted to get your take on.
Yeah, you're right. That's a real concern. Because if you're not intentional about it, you can end up with a situation where remote workers feel disconnected from the core team or like their ideas aren't being heard. So how do you avoid that?
Right. If you've experienced this firsthand, what are some things that have worked for you? What hasn't worked so well? I'm curious to hear your perspective on this.
Well, I think one of the most important things is to be proactive about communication and make sure that everyone feels included, no matter where they're working. And that might mean, setting up regular check-ins, using collaboration tools that allow for asynchronous communication, or even just, making an effort to reach out to remote team members and making sure that they feel like they're part of the conversation.
So it's almost like you have to be even more intentional about building those connections when you're not, physically in the same space. You can't just rely on those chance encounters or those hallway conversations.
Exactly. And it's not just about communication. It's also about creating opportunities for collaboration.
Yeah.
The article mentions companies that are using, like virtual whiteboards or online brainstorming tools to kind of replicate that feeling of working together in a room, even when everyone is remote.
So it's like we're creating a whole new set of tools and rituals for this new world of work. And it sounds like training is a big part of that, making sure that everyone has the skills and resources they need to really thrive in this environment.
Absolutely. And I think that's a key takeaway here. We're all still figuring this out. This whole shift to remote work, it's been a massive experiment. And there's no, one-size-fits-all solution. What works for one company might not work for another, and what worked last year might not work this year. So it's really about being adaptable, being willing to experiment, and constantly learning and evolving.
It's like we're pioneers, forging a new path. But speaking of forging new paths, there's one line in the article that really jumped out at me, and I'm curious to get your take on it. They said, remote working was never thought up to last.
That's a pretty bold statement. And I think it's sparked a lot of debate. Some people interpret it as meaning that remote work is just a fad, like it's a temporary solution that will eventually fade away.
Yeah, that's kind of how I read it at first, too. But as I thought about it more, I wondered if they were getting at something a little bit deeper, something about the need to constantly evolve and adapt.
I think you're right. It's not necessarily about remote work going away, but it's about, the need to be constantly rethinking and reimagining how we work. The way we approach remote work today might be very different from how we approach it 5 years from now.
It's like that saying, the only constant is change. And we're in this era of, rapid transformation, and the companies that thrive are going to be the ones that embrace that change and find ways to innovate within it.
Absolutely. And it's not just about, technology or processes. It's really about mindset. It's about creating a culture of continuous learning, experimentation, and adaptation, a culture that's comfortable with ambiguity and embraces the unknown.
It's not about finding the right way to do remote work. It's about embracing the journey and constantly evolving along the way.
I love that perspective. Okay, so I've covered a lot of ground here, from the neuroscience of brainstorming to the importance of company culture and the, ever-evolving nature of work itself. Yeah. Before we wrap up, let's take a moment to kind of recap some of the key takeaways for our listeners. Yeah. What are some of the most important points you'd like them to walk away with? First and foremost, I think it's important to remember that brainstorming is more than just a meeting. It's a neurological phenomenon. Our brains are literally wired for collaboration. And when we tap into that collective energy, we could achieve incredible things. It's
like we all have this superpower just waiting to be unleashed. But unlocking that power requires intentionality. We need to be deliberate about creating space for those creative sparks, even in a remote setting, whether it's through, structured brainstorming sessions, built-in social time, or just encouraging those casual interactions. It's about fostering that sense of connection and collaboration that's so essential for innovation.
And that brings us to another really crucial point: company culture. It's not enough to just talk about innovation. You have to create a culture that supports it. That means fostering a sense of psychological safety, where people feel comfortable sharing their ideas without fear of judgment, a culture that celebrates those nutty ideas and sees them as opportunities for growth and discovery.
So it's about creating an environment where people feel empowered to think differently, to challenge assumptions, and to push the boundaries of what's possible.
Exactly. And it's not just about, the what of innovation, but the how. It's about being adaptable, being willing to experiment, and constantly learning and evolving as the world of work continues to change around us.
Because the truth is, none of us has all the answers. We're all figuring this out together. And the more we can embrace that spirit of curiosity, collaboration, and continuous learning, the better equipped we'll be to navigate the challenges and opportunities of this new era of work. And who knows, maybe we'll even have some fun along the way.
Yeah, I love that. It's all about embracing the journey. But this whole conversation has gotten me thinking.
Yeah.
The article focused a lot on how to innovate in a remote setting. But
Yeah.
what about the why? Like, what's the bigger picture here? Why should we even care about all of this?
That's a great question. And I think it gets to the heart of what makes this whole topic so fascinating. We're not just talking about remote work or innovation in isolation. We're really talking about the very nature of human ingenuity and our ability to adapt and thrive in a constantly changing world. It's like, the tools might change, from water coolers to virtual whiteboards, but that underlying human need for connection, for creative expression, that's constant.
Exactly. And the companies, the teams, the individuals who figure out how to tap into that, regardless of where they're physically located, those are the ones who will succeed in the long run.
So it's almost like a Darwinian thing for businesses, adapt or become obsolete. It makes you wonder what the future holds, doesn't it?
It certainly does. And that's what makes this whole conversation so important. It's not just about finding the right answers. It's about asking the right questions, challenging assumptions, and being open to new possibilities.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time for our signature.
Provocative thought to leave our listeners pondering. The article argued that, remote working was never thought up to last. Do you agree? What does the future of innovation look like to you, especially as work continues to evolve? It's a question we all need to be thinking about. And we would love to hear your thoughts. Share your predictions, your hopes, your concerns in the comments. What does the future of work look like to you?
And what role will innovation play in shaping that future? We can't wait to hear what you come up with. Until next time, stay curious, keep innovating. And thanks for taking this deep dive with us.